There have been entire books written on typeface creation, typographic style, fonts. I mean, it's going to be incredibly difficult to cover choosing and using alternate fonts in just one lesson. So I want to paint a picture and give you the idea behind it more than give you specific step-by-step instruction. Because the truth is there is no specific step-by-step instruction up to a certain point, because fonts are like music or movies. It's almost like an artistic expression. Now, a lot of them are done for a very specific reason, and a lot of them have specific styles that are done for a very specific reason, but just like music, everyone's gonna have a different opinion on it. You're gonna like classical, or you're gonna like rap, or you're gonna like country, or both, or none. Maybe you hate it all, I don't know. But it's a very subjective kind of thing. So I want to give you the tools to make your own subjective decisions and sprinkle in a little objectivity along the way. And I love this subject. I love fonts. I get emotional over fonts. I like looking at them, the letter forms, the way they make you feel. Some of them are big and bold, and other ones are just very discreet and minimal. And I just love fonts. And I've been designing for a long time, almost 2 decades or so. Probably. I'm going to cut that part out. I've been designing for a long time, and I still love poring over fonts and looking at them and playing with them. It's just kind of a weird, nerdy obsession that I have developed as a designer, and I encourage you to get nerdy with your alternate fonts. So let's talk about a couple of reasons why you would not use a system font, why you would use an alternate font, why you would find a new typeface. Well, really, it's going to be kind of like a branding decision. It might be because you want to stand out in a specific way. And it might be because maybe there's a lot of competition in the marketplace and you want something that's really unique. That's exactly what I did with Flowkit. I originally released Flowkit as I was using San Francisco, like just a system font stack. But as this has evolved, there have been a lot of other tools that have kind of popped up that are similar or in the ballpark. And I just really wanted this to be super friendly and kind of round, maybe with an edge of like kind of techie vibe, but very friendly. So I went with this font called TT Round, I believe is the name of the font. And it's just got rounded edges, and it's got these fun little, I don't know, it's just like a fun font. And I wanted to use that font so it did stand out, and it works. It's not too over the top, so it works for headlines, it works for paragraph structures. But there might be some people, including you, that just doesn't like the font, and that's fine. So it's part practical branding, positioning, and it's also a large part subjective to the person who's using it and the person who's making the decision. So the same way that every song doesn't have the same guitar riff or the same drum beat, not every website needs the same typeface. And typeface is a huge differentiator between one website and another. And a lot of times the biggest differentiator is the actual typeface. So this one decision can have a profound impact. And it's not always as easy as just scrolling through and then just saying that font. A lot of times you try a font, you design it, you spend a week or two, and then you try a different font, you switch it out. Sometimes near the mid part of the project, you might change it out. And it depends on your situation. And a lot of times you don't have that option, but it is kind of this artistic search for the perfect kind of thing. But no matter which font you're using, I really like this quote from Elements of Typographic Style. It says, "A typeface of modest merits should be handled with great discretion, formality, and care. It should be set in modest sizes, better yet in one size only, with the caps well spaced, the lines well leaded, and the lowercase well fitted and modestly kerned. The line length should be optimal and the page impeccably proportioned. In short, the typography should be richly and superbly ordinary, so that attention is drawn to the quality of the composition, not to the individual letter forms." So that's talking more about individual letter forms, and also if you're using just fonts in general, it needs to support the content. It's not all about the crazy typeface. Sometimes those flares are fun, but at the end of the day, the typeface supports the message and the content. And that's what this quote is getting at. So make sure you're not just using a random font without purpose. And absolutely do not use a font in your designs before you know whether or not it's even available as a web font, or if you know that it has an app license or something like that. So let's dig into some of those little objective details before we expand on some more examples. So what kind of attributes of a custom font are you looking for? Are you looking for a sans serif font with just clean and simple? Or are you looking for something a little bit more sharp with serif edges, or even like a monospace that has like a really techie vibe? There's lots of different you kind of want to come up with the adjectives that would describe your project or the thing that describes your brand when you're looking for a typeface. The same way that you would want to listen to a music track to set as the soundtrack to a certain scene in a movie. It's kind of like you just kind of have to listen and look and wait for that moment to when you're like, oh, that's it. It's almost like this aha moment sometimes. And other times you just like a font and you pick it and it's not that big of a deal. And other times it can be kind of a magical experience. And sometimes you want to decide up front, do I want to use a custom display font for only the titles? So I've got a title, all of my big titles are a very custom, unique font, like a display typeface that's not necessarily suited for body copy. So I'm just going to use a system font for body copy and kind of these big ornate titles. And it doesn't have to be ornate. It could just be a different typeface with standard body copy. Or you could use one custom font for everything. The way I just showed in the Flowkit example, I'm using that for the titles and the body copy. And then there's other times when you might choose a very specific display typeface and then another custom body typeface. But there's going to be different type styles that are used for display only, or ones that are body copy only, or monospace. Like, the different styles have different use cases depending on how you want to put it into your designs. So another example of a custom font that I used in a project, this was a client project called Fiberstream, and we're kind of rebranding a little bit and also redesigning this marketing site. And we kind of landed on this idea of, since they are an internet company, that can be kind of boring if you just use system fonts, like, okay, give me my internet. But to kind of differentiate, they wanted to kind of be like the Nike of internet service providing, or the Adidas of internet service provider. So I actually used Avant-Garde, which is the Adidas font is actually set in that typeface. So if I just go in here really quickly. So we wanted this kind of bold typeface that made this internet service feel a lot more sporty and new and kind of fresh. Like, they're all about super fast internet, super simple billing. So the whole vibe was this kind of black and white orange vibe that you could almost switch out some really nice sneakers in this website and it could still work. So there are a lot of things that support that kind of vibe of the website that we wanted to showcase. But the typeface was one of the early leading decisions behind that particular design. And that kind of drove a lot of the initial design, was picking that typeface, experimenting with the thinner weights, and then some of those thicker, more in-your-face kind of styles that we wanted to go for. And so in this case, we're using Avant-Garde for every single piece of text. So we picked a custom font that had multiple weights, and we used it for every single thing. Whereas in contrast, in these My Monero designs, I ended up using, this was a desktop app, so we're using San Francisco, but it's also a cryptocurrency app, and a lot of these big, long numbers, I felt kind of needed this monospace font. So I actually used this font called Native that my friend Maddox Schuler created through his type foundry called Fort. And it's just a fun monospace font that I knew that he was actually making the font when I was designing this website. So he gave me a copy. It was kind of like better than using the standard Menlo or regular monospace font. It just had a little bit more of a personality to it. So I was able to blend the monospace font with a lot of the just kind of the titles and everything, every single piece of information didn't need to be monospaced, but I made the decision that if it had to do with wallet addresses or something inside of the cryptocurrency wallet, that was going to be this like techie monospaced font. Whereas like everything that had to do with the system organization was going to be the system font. So you can see like the wallet balance is set in monospace and these addresses are monospaced, but I'm using titles and the UI labels with the system font to kind of give it that language, that visual language of system font means action and categories, whereas like things specific to the wallet are going to be monospaced. So like even the name of the wallet, the labels and the helper text and the color, like these are all set in that monospace font. So I ended up using that monospace font a lot, but for some of the labels on some of this stuff, I ended up using the system font. So that was like another way that you can experiment with exploring custom fonts, is coming up with a kind of a system. As you design, as things kind of make sense, you come up with a system in your mind, like, okay, this section is going to use these fonts and this section is going to use these fonts, and here's why. And a lot of times as you're thinking through these decisions, you can share that idea with your client or the people you're working with to get them to buy into that idea. That way it's a lot easier when you show it to them, where they're like, oh yeah, this is what we talked about. I can see that works a little bit better now. Another example of when I picked one font and used it everywhere was for this Shiplify project. And again, just to remind you, this was a transportation logistics management application, kind of like a very, it's not boring because it was a fun project, but it's kind of like a bland subject matter, like shipping information. And I like to think like if something is naturally kind of boring and bland, I want to make it a little bit more lively. Like even with user flows sound boring. So I wanted to use a fun typeface to show off Flowkit that it's fun. And so the same way with this Shiplify project, I didn't want to use the system font. So I convinced them that we should use this Gotham Rounded font from Heffler & Co. So you can check out Gotham Rounded here. I think you can even type in here. And it's just a fun, quirky, rounded font that kind of, in some ways, counteracts the boringness of a shipping application. So you can see that I'm using this everywhere. I'm using the kind of regular weight here, some of the heavier weights for the actions. And I feel like for this particular project, it just added enough of a fun, soft edge that it just kind of added a little bit of life to the project. And it has a lot of weights, a lot of different styles. And that's one thing that you want to make sure that you kind of investigate before you choose a font, is that it has enough weights that you can have regular bold, demi bold, extra black. Some of the weights and experimentation, it gives you room for that experimentation, because if you have a font that only has one or two weights, then you're a lot more limited with how you can use it. And that's not to say you can't use those. You just have to be aware of that before you get started with it. And one more example of when a custom font was used for the entire project was this ExxonMobil project. Now, ExxonMobil had a typeface called EM Print, which I guess stood for ExxonMobil Print. And they had it adapted for websites, but it was kind of this sans serif that had a slightly kind of modern look to it. You can see the A doesn't have the little extender down there, and these big rounded P's with the sharp internal edges. A pretty nice font, and that was already their font. So there wasn't really any option to go with another custom font, because this is the one that is their font. So you might find that sometimes you just have a font handed to you, and that's the font you use. So hopefully it has enough weights and enough expansion ability that it can work. And in this case it did. In some cases you might find that it doesn't. I've had clients in the past where they had set brand fonts, and I just wasn't feeling using that for the web or for their app. And then I had to make a new kind of case why they should adopt a new font. And then that became a little mini project within the project, is convincing them to use a font. So creating a pitch deck and outlining the pros and cons for using this font versus that. Sometimes you have to do that if you feel strongly about a certain font. But if you if you don't have a strong reason to back it up, then you shouldn't try to take on that endeavor and that battle of pitching that font when it's just like, you're not going to win an argument by saying, well, I just think it's a cool font. I mean, if it's up in the air and people are questioning it and you're like, yeah, I really like this, then that might be a way to do it. But if you're dealing with a big organization that has brand guidelines, then you're going to have to bring a little more to the table with your font selection before you can actually convince someone to use something different. So the way that you can do your due diligence for choosing an alternate font to use, number one is going to be look at the cost. Is it a free font? Are you going to use Google Fonts? Because that would kind of eliminate the cost factor. But then that also brings up the fact that, well, if it's a free font, then a lot of other people have access to it. In fact, everyone does. So it's not going to be the big differentiator that you might want it to be. So that's just kind of a trade-off where there are some really good Google fonts, but everyone has access to those. So you might find yourself maybe wanting to go something a little bit more exclusive or premium. Another thing you need to look at is this a subscription font? Sometimes web-based fonts have subscriptions, whether it's monthly or annual, like typography.com has their cloud typography and you have to pay yearly. And I can't remember the specifics, but I do know that you pay regularly to have them host and serve your fonts to your website or your app. And that also comes with a development issue as well, as like, how fast are these going to be? Are we going to rely on third-party servers to send us our fonts, or do we get a copy of them and can we serve them ourselves? So these are some of the things that you need to think about when you're trying to convince someone to use a custom font. Are you going to be able to afford it, or is the client willing to pay for it? And also, is there an ongoing fee? And if so, just make a note of all those things and present that information when you present the font to use. So I just want to run through a handful of foundries that I really enjoy and I really love their typefaces. This is called Letters from Sweden. They just have some really fun fonts. I've probably purchased, 4 or 5 of them. And the thing I like about these is you can always get in here and just test out what the fonts look like. If you have a certain phrase or heading or body of copy, you can come in here and paste it and you can just kind of get a feel for, how does this look compared to other things. Ono Typeco, they have a lot of kind of quirky, fun fonts. And I don't know if I've even ever bought one of these typefaces. I just know that this is a fun foundry that I enjoy the work that they produce. And I'm always looking for foundries and typefaces that I really enjoy. That way I might have the ability to use something in the future. And I know, okay, I remember that. So I just kind of make a note to save these foundries and these typefaces. Line 2 or Linato, however you pronounce that, has some nice fonts. Their website is a little crazy, I guess. Let's see if we can find out how to click on typefaces. Yeah, so a lot of these look really nice, and sometimes you might find one that you really like that it's actually like, oh, well, actually this doesn't look too different from this other free one, so actually let's just go with the free one. Sometimes you might get inspired by one, but then you say, okay, what font looks like this? And you Google that and you might find a different one. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you find a font that you really like that you have to go with that one. A lot of fonts have very small differences. Some fonts might look exactly the same, but the R is slightly different, or the lowercase descenders curve instead of go straight. There's a lot of subtle differences between some of these custom typefaces. My friend Maddox has great fonts at fortfoundry.com. Lots of different kind of, almost like display typefaces that you wouldn't necessarily use for all of your UI copy, but this would be really cool as, a headline in an app, or it kind of has that news feel. Colophon Foundry has some awesome typefaces. Another one that I really love is Clem Type Foundry. Lots of awesome typefaces here. And in the Clem Foundry, you can even go here and you can download free test fonts. Not every type foundry allows you to do this, but Clem does allow you to do it. And I've downloaded these before and I've tested them out. And sometimes you need to test them out because you don't know exactly how it's going to work. And the type sample tool is not always going to be adequate before you can, decide whether or not it works. Okay, so for homework, I want you to pick a screen to design. It can be either something that you've designed in the past for another lesson, or it can be just a simple headline and text and a button, just whatever you want to do. You come up with something that you like, and I want you to do it in 3 different versions. I want you to use, number 1, a display typeface for titles only. So something that's kind of like a little bit more impactful for the titles, and then use like San Francisco or Enter or something like that as the body copy. Secondly, use either the same font or a different font for everything. Use it for the body copy, use it for the titles, use it for the labels, whatever you're designing, use that for everything. And make sure that you're using, your example includes at least a body of copy, like 3 or 5 sentences. It might be a form or something, but make sure it includes enough variety of text, like headline, body copy, and maybe a few other elements so you have enough to play with. I want you to use the same design, but use 2 different typefaces that are custom, one for the titles and one for the body. So you have 3 designs, but one's using display and then system body copy, one's using a custom font for everything, and then the third is using 2 different custom fonts for everything else. And you can use Google Fonts, or you can use Adobe Fonts, formerly known as Typekit, or you can go to Clem Type Foundry and download some of those test fonts. And if you're feeling super excited about this, go and buy your own font. Go find one that you really love, or 2 that you really love, and spend a little bit of money on it. And you might be able to use it for this exercise, and then maybe use it for your personal site in the future or some other project. So anyway, I'm super excited about this because I love typography, and I'm really excited to see what you come up with your custom fonts and kind of introducing this new element. So post your work, post fonts that you find into the Slack channel, get some feedback on the ones that you find, and definitely post your work. Love to see everything that you come up with. So let's get started.